Thank you for staying with us. With growing concerns surrounding climate change, particularly in low-income countries, the call for action is becoming more urgent. Challenges like desertification, erosion, heat waves, floods continue to be at the front burner, where the livelihoods of communities, especially farmers, poor households and families who depend on these natural resources for survival, are affected. With agriculture, food security, waste management, water and sanitation, forestry and land use being some focus areas for Nigeria's action plan, how much of it would be sustainable and viable to the country? Well, joining us from our Abuja studio is the CEO of Vivacity Development, Oluwakemi Areola. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, when you look at Nigeria's action plan on climate change over the years, where we're looking at cutting down on greenhouse gases by 2050 and 2070, how far have we come? Because you play in this space. Do you think that we are making progress? Are we inching closer to our target?
Of course, we're making progress, but wherever we can record progress, we can still see that there is a lot more that needs to be done. We commend the policies that have been put in place to ensure that this progress is being made, but we need to look further and see what we can do as individuals as well to ensure that we reach our goals.
All right, and concerning the climate change conference that's holding in the Middle East this year, talk to us about Nigeria's action plan. What what you and your team are going with. So what's the action plan really about?
Okay, so for us, last year we were at the COP27, which happened in Egypt. And we started up a conversation, which was the intergenerational dialogue, where there was the understanding that in the next 50 years, it's the young people that will still be alive. Climate change does concern them, and their actions can as well mitigate, the effects of climate change as in the here and now, as well as in the next 50 years' time. And then expanding on that this year, we've looked at the fact that it's not just young people, but it's all ages. There needs to be some form of army awareness in this climate change space, because individuals do not know, a good number of individuals, not all, they don't know the exact effects of climate change on their personal day-to-day activities, as well as on their businesses, communities, and then, the country and the continent at large. So what we are doing, what is important to us, is to take this individualistic approach to climate change awareness, as well as the fight against climate change. So what can we do as individuals? What can we do in the private sector? How can the CSO sector also assist in helping us achieve these goals from an individualistic perspective? So we're launching a pledge on the 4th of December, where we aim to have about 20 million Nigerians sign this pledge as their personal individual commitment towards the fight against climate change. So as an individual, what do you commit to doing with your plastic? What do you commit to doing with energy consumption? And how can you contribute to various communities across the country to assist them in the fight against climate change? For when the floods come, how many communities are ready for, the torrential rains when they come, and to ensure that it doesn't have devastating effects on the community at that time. So we're going to this climate change meeting, where there will be numerous companies and countries where we can all sit and have conversations to see how it's being done in other countries, and see some of the things that we can adapt in our own environment to ensure that we are in this fight against climate change.
Well, there are those who would say that conversations have been ongoing before now. Even at the UN General Assembly, there are conversations surrounding climate change, and not much have been seen with regards to commitment from countries on committing to cutting down on greenhouse gases, on the finances needed to addressing matters of climate change. So how much of a difference is this conversation that you intend to have, as well as the pledge you are talking about? We have seen so many persons put out things like that for people to commit to doing something, but not much results we get from these things.
I totally agree with you, and I feel this is because of the lack of awareness. So you see a lot of people committing to something that they don't totally understand. So first and foremost, what is important is to increase this awareness, to increase this education. You will agree with me that little drops of water is what makes an ocean. And we can't keep waiting for huge policies and initiatives to come into play, and as well as massive finance. But, as well as when I keep speaking to the young people, I let them know that the jobs as we know them today, about 30 million of them will be obsolete in the next 7 years. There are jobs in the climate change space. There's a lot that can be done in this climate change space. So why don't we put the resources that we do have, instead of focusing on the ones that we don't have? Why don't we put the resources that we do have towards this fight? So why don't we see a lot more Nigerians taking up jobs in the sustainability, secular and climate change environments? Why don't we see them upskilling themselves in these areas? How many courses do we know are available to the unemployed in Nigeria in this particular sector? So why aren't we getting, various institutions and like I said, the tri-sector, so government, CSO, and the private sector, why aren't we getting them all together to work on some of these workable policies or workable initiatives that are, as well as, increasing the country's GDP, creating wealth creation opportunities for young people, reducing our emissions, and creating a better country for all, a better continent, and a better world for all. So that's the focus. The focus is, what can we do as individuals? What can we do as organizations? And how do we continue to increase this awareness, so that once pledges like this are being made, and once finance is being pumped in, people know exactly where to channel it to.
All right, and another, side to the question would also be, okay, so you are eyeing yet again an international platform as a COP conference, so to speak, but you also spoke earlier about the issue of the recurring flooding that we experience here in this part of the world, in Nigeria, I should say. So what homegrown solutions, what individual approaches, would you proffer as a way to end this recurring problem that we have on our hands? What are your thoughts basically on this problem?
So first of all, one of the main reasons why it's great to go to meetings like this to have this conversation is because there's no point reinventing the wheel. The wheel already exists. How do we adapt this wheel to fit in with our peculiar, environment? Let's listen to, panel discussions that will be had on that day, are listening to persons from other parts of the world to see how they've been able to we won't say solve, because nobody's, totally solved any of these problems, but how have they been able to mitigate? What initiatives, programs are being put in place to do this? And then, Nigerians need to understand, before the floods come, before the rains come, so let's look at preventative measures before these things, come, because we know they're going to come. We know that weather patterns are changing. We know flooding is increasing. So before it comes, what do we do? How do we speak to our civil engineers to ensure that the drainage systems in certain areas are adapting with the times? Because, of course, we have some areas that have great drainage systems, and some of these things, have been well thought out before any work commences. But times are changing. The erosion and the flooding is increasing. So we need increasing measures as well. We need increasing technologies as well. So how do we, learn from some of these technologies that are being shared globally and, bring them home to Nigeria and adapt what we currently have to, the best global best practices or practices that are peculiar to our environment. That's number one. And then number two is, how do we get persons to go out into the communities that are worst affected by some of these issues? How do we get them to go out there and educate them on what they can do, and as well as provide them with some of the solutions? So we know the rains will come by a certain month, and we know that these are the certain things that can be put in place for these communities. And it's for the individuals to take, charge of these things, because you also know that you have some of these initiatives put together by CSOs or private sector, companies, that they go into these communities to try to help, to try to put in some form of relief for these communities. And you have the communities themselves rejecting these interventions. So, this rejection is because they don't know how these things can help them, and they don't know the long-term effects that some of these climate change issues will have on their communities. Sometimes even wiping out, total communities completely. So it's very important that we create this awareness, and we ensure that the awareness is distilled in the language that these communities understand. There's no point in us having elitist policies and initiatives that don't go right down to the grassroots, because, as we've said, they are some of the people that are most affected by some of these issues.
But there are those who would say there's a limit to which individuals can go, or individual solutions can go. There's the need to put pressure on government to do what is necessary as it is right now. But let me quickly touch this report as we inch closer to wrapping up this conversation. A report put out by UNICEF saying that 110 million Nigerian children at risk and more vulnerable, having been confronted with the harsh realities of rising temperature, flooding, drought, and severe storms, talking about climate change. And it's saying that this development is making it second most vulnerable situation worldwide in terms of exposure of children to climate change. How do you react to this?
Of course, we as a collective, as communities, need to come together and assist the government in the type of policies that are peculiar to different environments. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all for the whole country. So I feel every community needs to have some form of two-way conversation with the government and input in formulating some of these policies. Policies should not be created in isolation. They shouldn't be created without the voices of the people that actually live in these communities and are affected by most of these things. So I feel, yes, it's time to continue to, I don't know if we say compel or encourage or work with the government to ensure that these policies are put in place, and ensure that these policies are not just drawn up, but also implemented. So how do we implement some of these policies? So government, yes, create the enabling environment, draft up the policies, and then private sector and the CSO sector as well work with the government on implementation of these policies. But let there be two-way communication. Let's hear from the communities. Let's understand what are the issues peculiar to individual environments. Some environments are facing droughts, while some environments are facing, flood. So we need to know exactly what different communities need, what different environments need, and put together things that work for them.
Right, and even the Minister on the Environment actually attributed to this recently at an event. We'll have to leave this conversation here now. We must thank you, CEO of Vivacity Development, Oluwakemi Areola, for your time on the program.
Thank you.
All right.